Hello, fiendlings. How the hell are ya? I finished recording the Medusa Zone and it's currently awaiting review by Audible. If you can't wait for that, visit patreon.com/Paul E Cooley and it's for sale there. Or become a patron for $2 a month and get access to all the chapters, as well as all my other audiobooks. I have no idea how many hours of my voice are now available on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, but since the Derelict Saga runs nearly 43 hours, I imagine it's well over 100 hours in total. That's a lot of content, folks. Considering I'm constantly adding to it and have 5 more books to record, it'll be many, many more by the end of 2025. I'm nearing the end of the first draft of the new novel, so I should have that ready for the publisher by the end of February. No word yet on an actual publication date. Now that I've relayed all the news that's fit to babble about, how about some more story? Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again soon. Here's episode 12 of The Black, Evolution. Chapter 19. Exhausted, foot aching with pain, and more than a little tired of looking at figures and simulations, Catfish announced he was done for the day. Givens, mostly quiet while they dissected the grenades and Catfish studied the mechanisms, blinked at him. "Still another hour until quitting time." "Not for me. I'm done." Givens said nothing and simply left the level, seemingly a little put out that they'd quit early. Well, too goddamn bad. Catfish needed to elevate his leg and get the fuck out of there. He considered resting his leg on the table while he waited for Shauna, but decided lingering was a bad idea. Instead, he took the elevator to the first floor and headed outside, the zip strip still on the cigarette pack in his pocket. The cool November air's humid chill hit him like a slap in the face, but he was thankful for it just the same. It wasn't cold enough to burn your skin, but cold enough to wake you up. He shivered and pulled his arms around himself when a gust of wind rushed through the gaps between the buildings. Moisture beaded on his cheeks and dampened his beard. He heard the door open behind him and turned around. No longer wearing a lab coat, Shauna stood with her arms crossed in the freshening breeze. "You trying to get pneumonia?" "No," he said. "Just needed to get out of there for a while." Shauna sighed. "I know how that feels." "Well," he said, "we can stay here for another 30 minutes and grab some grub, or we can head back to the trailer and come back for food later." "We need a damn takeout joint." "Got that right," he said with a laugh. "Chinese, Indian, Mexican." Catfish smacked his lips, his beard dancing with the movements. "Been a long time since I've had good Tex-Mex." "That's for damn sure." Shauna held the door open. "Get in here. Get something to drink and relax. I'd rather not have to come back to this." Her voice trailed off. "This what?" he asked. She seemed to shake away a thought. "Doesn't matter. I just want this place in my rear view for the night." "Fine," Catfish said with a pout. "I'll get out of the cold, Mom." She punched him on the shoulder as he headed in. "Don't get sassy with me. It'll cost you." "Like you can spend money here," he said. Shauna grinned. "Not what I meant at all." "Wait, what did you mean?" He tried to get her to share what she meant, but she was having none of it. In a way, it was cute. Maybe that's why she'd done it, offering a game of some kind to keep them occupied. "We're just like little kids," he thought. That brought back the memory of last night, and an embarrassed smile lit his face. Okay, he thought, not like little kids. The commissary was open, but the serving area was closed. A few bowls of snack mix, finger sandwiches, and thermoses of hot chocolate graced the few dining tables. "I love you, Robbie," Shauna said, and made a beeline for the hot chocolate. "What are you, 5?" She stuck her tongue out at Catfish and filled a cup with a steaming, frothy drink before dropping 3 marshmallows inside. "Perfection," she said. "Perfection?" Shauna took a small sip and shrugged. "No, it's not perfect. That would require some Irish cream. You know, the alcoholic kind." A dark mustache appeared above her lips, but her smile was as radiant as ever. "You should try it." Grumbling, he fixed himself a cup. She stood next to the thermos, counting off the steps. He stopped more than once to glare at her, but had difficulty fighting a grin. When he finally tasted the concoction, he forced a grimace. "This sucks." She punched his shoulder again. "Shut up and grab a seat. You need somewhere to stretch." He followed her to one of the few remaining tables, one of the small ones, and sat down with an oof. "Good day?" she asked. "Not really." "Little Catfish not up to engineering duties?" He leaned back and rested his boot on the chair directly across from him. "Givens and I are working on a type of grenade." "Grenade?" Shauna asked, as if the word were something foreign. He sipped from his hot chocolate. "Grenade. Something that will produce a shockwave big enough to damage M2 when it's solid. Good idea, so long as you don't blow up the facility while testing. Too true, he said. But I think we have that covered. Moore provided us with a shielded container where things can go boom. So what's the problem? He shrugged. Lots of calculations, lots of design based on explosion shape, how best to create the shockwave, possible damage rates, range. Okay, I get it. Plus, he said with a sneer, I have Lieutenant Creepy at my elbow. Guy doesn't say jack shit unless I ask him a question or if he wants me to explain something. He practically stared over my shoulder all day, reading whatever I was reading and watching my every goddamn keystroke. He shook his head slowly in exasperation. Shauna giggled and he glared at her. I'm unhappy with my coworker. She coughed twice to get her laughter under control. Well, she said, trying to hold it together, could be worse. Moore could be the one looking over your shoulder. Gee, thanks for that chilling idea. He flipped off the security camera in the nearest corner of the ceiling. Hope she heard that, too. Rolling her eyes, Shauna looked down in her mug. Okay, he said. What? He tapped his fingers on the table. Something's bothering you. No. Catfish leaned forward. Talk to me. Tell me about your day. Anything. She sighed. Well, you have trouble with your coworker. I think I'm going to have problems with my new ones. She explained how the dispensers worked and how the lab was set up. He paid close attention to her description of the failsafe systems, Thermite and Semtex. For some reason, he thought that was important. He'd remember it. Those 2 security guards we have inside the lab complex with us, God only knows what the hell they're thinking, Shauna said. Really? Why? She smirked. We sectioned 2 drops of M2, 1 from each batch, and ran temperature tests on them. That was fun. A shiver ran down his spine. Fun? Yeah, she said. Scared the shit out of me. Well, what happened? She told him. He wasn't surprised it didn't make him feel better. 4 scientists playing with a living bomb, and instead of just dealing with 1, why not handle 3 more of the goddamn things? He clenched his fingers. Do I slug Kate or one of the boys? Neither, Shauna said. It was a group decision. So I'd have to smack you too. Shauna stirred the dregs of her hot chocolate noisily. Yes, you would. So what was this supposed to prove? Well, it was interesting. The M2 from the Leaguer test barrel, we call it Poppy, acted differently than the sample from Ben Taub. He raised an eyebrow. Called? Taub, she said. Man, I thought Jay had more imagination than that. Don't ask. Anyway, we got a strange reaction when they were frozen. Poppy crystallized, but get this, Taub grew hairs. What? Taub grew hairs when the temp dipped below freezing. Hairs, Catfish said. Of all the things she could have told him, it was the least expected. Based on what he'd seen aboard Leaguer, he'd expected crustacean features, or at least a passing resemblance. But hairs? What kind of hairs? Shauna's face lit up with excitement. Neil thinks it's the same kind of hairs a spider grows, but these were... She broke off, searching for a word. More like mammal hair, like it was trying to grow fur. Come on, that's bullshit. I don't think it is. I don't know how it's possible, but it happened. Shauna looked past him as if replaying the scene in her mind. The barrel sample never came in contact with non-ocean organisms. If there was any real bacterial growth or dust inside the barrel before we filled it up, it was the only thing M2 had to eat. Therefore, Poppy didn't have a chance to consume any new biological matter. Yeah, so? She rolled her eyes. Poppy crystallized. Taub crystallized and grew hair. Taub was, birthed from a human being? He thought for a moment before it clicked. Shit, Taub ate mammals. Right, she said. I'm sure it also consumed roaches, bugs, mites, any critter that might be hiding in a hospital that large. It also consumed medical waste. Jesus. The films proved that the things at Ben Taub acted differently than ours. The M2 on Leaguer didn't want to move around like that. It tried to grab you with a tentacle and pull you in. Exactly. The Taubs moved like some kind of spider thing out of a horror movie. She noisily slurped one last sip from the cup. The only explanation is that it, learned, or changed its form based on its food source. Food source? He echoed. You mean it is what it eats? A bright light gleamed in her eyes. I think that's exactly what I mean. Jesus. And what does that tell us? Shauna shrugged. It's really just a theory. It could be a coincidence, but I don't think so. Nothing else really fits. She flicked a finger against the cup. But if our hunch is right, it means M2 has a completely different life cycle than anything else in nature. It doesn't just infect like a parasite. It consumes its victim or material and incorporates it into itself. She looked down into her cup. It's unique. God was on too much fucking acid, Catfish said. Oh, that's nothing. I'm becoming more and more convinced M2 isn't even from Earth. His eyes widened. What? She looked around conspiratorially. I don't think it's from here. Why? Shauna pushed the cup aside and tinted her hands. We know it survives without the need of sunlight. Yeah, so the damn lanternfish can do that. Yes, she agreed, so can a ton of other creatures. We have plenty of examples of animals that survive without light, thrive in fact, but stay with me. He knew she would eventually get to the point, and it wouldn't help to rush her. He'd known her long enough to realize when she was on a roll. Continue. Okay, it is a life form that is literally liquid. It has no shell, container, or micro-thin barrier to hold in its guts. No solid material at all. I'm sure some things on Earth get close, but I'm willing to bet nothing qualifies. And if it does, it damn sure isn't as intelligent as those things down there, she said, pointing to the floor. That suggests a life cycle we've never seen, never encountered, never even dreamed was possible. He waited a few beats, giving her a chance to roll on, but it seemed she'd finally come to a stop. Extraterrestrial, he said dully. While she'd been speaking, the image of thousands of insects and ocean species flashed through his mind. What if it's not a life form at all? He said. Now it was her turn to look confused. Explain? Man, he said with a grin. Put on some Floyd, put a bong on the table, and we'll look the parts for this conversation. What? He waved away the question. Never mind. You know what the Portuguese man-of-war is? That's a jellyfish, right? Not really. It's actually a group of cells or whatever that... Fuck. Here's a simple version. It's like a colony. They conglomerate with one another and, I don't know, specialize themselves, and then get together and make that sail, the long strings of stingers, and everything else. So it's not really one creature, but many, each doing their own thing, but acting in concert. Shauna reached for the cup, peered into it as though the hot chocolate had somehow replenished itself, and thumbed it away in frustration. Now I understand what you meant about the bong. He grinned. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, okay, I do. So one cell of M2 gets together with another, and they decide to work together. Right, he said. I mean, there's something else going on there, but think about it. Just like you said about your experiment today. In isolation, away from its progenitor, parent, shit, I don't know the word. Whatever. It gets cut off from its colony, and the subcolony that's left decides to work together instead. Create a new M2 entity. That's terrifying in its plausibility. He laughed. Isn't it? I need more hot chocolate. You're going to burst or get the beaties. Whatever, she said, and headed back to the thermos, snatching up Catfish's cup on her way. He smiled while he watched her fill the cup and dunk the marshmallows fully before she finally stirred the concoction. Years ago, when he'd first met her, he thought she was an intelligent idiot. She barely spoke when Thomas wasn't around and seemed terrified of Catfish. She and JP bonded nearly instantly, but he imagined that was more because of JP's personality than anything else. The man was always a big brother to whoever needed one. But after a few months, she warmed up to Catfish and started spending time around him. More and more. She would sometimes take a break from whatever engineering project Thomas had cooked up to join Catfish and JP in the warehouse. She'd walk in when they were making sexual jokes about the Waldos or various other attachments used on AUVs and ROVs. After that, she even played poker with them. She was good at bluffing and usually took some of everyone's money before the night was through. Drove JP crazy. But something was different now. He wondered if maybe it had always been different, and he just never noticed. Thinking? She asked as she placed the fresh cup of hot chocolate before him. He gestured at the cup. Thanks. Welcome. He said nothing. Catfish, share. Maybe that's not a plausible theory after all, he said. What? No, it's great. He shook his head. It's got a giant gaping hole in it, though. What do you mean? Simple. If one speck of M2 was enough to consume a human body, then where did the rest of the M2 come from? Did it convert all the biomass into more of its own cells? Just magically create them and bend them to its will? Shauna said. I think I see what you're saying. That's more of a question for Neil. He's the bio guy. Biochemist, right? I wish we had a xenobiologist. You read too much science fiction, she said. No, he said through a laugh. I'm living it. A grin spread across Shauna's face. Point taken. If you're right, it's like a virus. It infects the cell, causes it to make more viruses, and destroys it in the process. Her grin faded slightly. That doesn't sound right either. But it sounds close. Close, but no cigar? He snapped his fingers. Damn. What? I should have asked more for some cigars. A moment later, the foyer behind the door echoed with noise. Catfish turned in time to see the other scientists entering the dining room. Well, there goes the party. Nah, Catfish said. It's just beginning. Chapter 20. By the time they finished dinner and returned to the trailer, Shauna found herself yawning over and over again. It had been a long day, and a huge meal at the end of it hadn't helped. She felt bloated and ready to pop. Damn it, the food here shouldn't be this good. The rain had decided to stop, but the clouds still obscured the stars and moon. Shit, they couldn't even see airplane lights as they streaked above the low ceiling. Her teeth chattered as she maneuvered the cart through the breezeway created by the buildings and out the other side. Their trailers sat on the tarmac, the porch lights glowing. Shauna blinked. You leave your lights on? No, he said. She noticed he had his arms wrapped around himself against the fresh breeze. I didn't. I always make sure those things are off. Well, she said, that's comforting. She pulled up to Catfish's trailer and jumped out. Come on, Gimp. Whatever, he said. She waited for him to struggle out of the cart and walk to the door. I'll go first, she said, climbing the steps and opening the door before he had a chance to speak. She flipped on the interior lights and gazed around the room. A grin slowly lit her face. I guess the maid has been here. She walked inside, waiting for Catfish to take a look. The bed was made with fresh linen, the floor had been cleaned, and all the plastic and paper from his new clothes had been swept away as though they had never existed. A neat pile of extra blankets sat on the foot of the bed. Wow. Do they do turn-down service as well? That might be asking a bit much. How does a maid get security clearance to work here? She snickered. I think this is technically a military facility. They might have some enlisted to handle that. Oh, you might be right. He glanced at the door. Or they're a bunch of mercs. I don't think so, Shauna said. This is too damn government. I mean, we're right next to Ellington Field. Losing the fight to a loud yawn, she covered her mouth and let it loose. Jesus, woman, Catfish laughed. Be a little louder next time. Sorry. She stretched her back with a groan of pleasure. I need a hot shower. Catfish kicked the floor. Knew there was something I forgot to do. What's that? Was going to ask more about using the showers in the dorms. He pointed to the tiny shower cubicle. I can barely move around in there. She sighed. Not a bad idea. Tell you what, she said, nonchalantly undressing. I've got first. You've got second. Okay, he said. She liked the half-embarrassed look on his face. You'll have to towel me off, of course. Of course. Shauna stepped out of her panties and walked slowly to the shower, enjoying the feel of his hungry gaze sliding over her body. I'll be quick. I hope not. Catfish snored lightly. She'd had to pry his arm from around her shoulder and move it next to her. The moment she did, she wished she hadn't. It was comforting to be held, skin on skin, naked, vulnerable, and protected all at the same time, but she was wide awake, and he was dead asleep. She shuffled out of his grasp to the edge of the bed. He said something in his sleep but didn't wake up. Good. The last thing she wanted to do was awaken him. Someone should be getting some Z's. That was the hell of it. She had been, until the dream. She'd been back aboard Leaguer, trapped inside the lab. The sample in the beaker had come alive and escaped the lab table. It was somewhere in the shadows, waiting for her, moving toward her, coming for her. Thomas banged on the door, his voice still coming through the cell phone in her hands as he forced his way into the sealed lab. But I have to tell you something, he said as the last bolts gave way and the door swung open. Things are different now. She swung her head from the threat in the shadows to face the door. Thomas stood there, his face set in that all-too-familiar grin, but something was wrong. The flesh beneath his pants wriggled as though something crawled up his leg. Then another, and another. Dozens and dozens of them. And then they were beneath his shirt, dark shadows worming their way up his body. Tendrils of smoke drifted through the fabric, her nose filling with the smell of burned hair. That scent all but disappeared, replaced by the stench of rancid meat. The shadows rose above his waist, impossibly black holes in reality that seemed to bore into him rather than move across him. They reached his chin, and his mouth opened wide. Hundreds of the amorphous, featureless shapes practically leaped inside. He closed his mouth and stood there, still as a statue. "Thomas?" she wheezed. His eyes had become distant, as though he were looking at something far away. She held her breath as she waited for something to happen. In the shadows of the room, something slithered. She flinched as his gaze swung back to her. His dull eyes became pools of swirling darkness. His mouth opened, and the sound of frying bacon filled her ears. She clamped her hands against her head to stifle the brain-shattering sound. Thomas's lips had turned black, his pale skin rippling in strips of darkness that seemed to erase him a slash at a time. The crackling sound faded as a pool of black ooze coalesced where he had once been. As she screamed and tried to shuffle further away from the creature, an eye stalk rose from the pool with the crunch of a shattered shell. But inside of a slowly spinning black orb at the stalk's end, the eye wasn't black. It was blue, like the color of Thomas's eyes. The dream had ended, but not before she heard something that might have been Thomas's dead voice. She had awakened with a start, but managed not to scream. That had been what felt like hours ago. It had taken her a long time to get that image out of her head, and quite a while before she could stop shaking. Since then, she tried to turn her mind to other matters, like science. Evolution. It was a word they'd used all day today, and the day before. An organism must adapt to changes in its environment, its food supply, and its predators. For instance, if the prey does not adapt to a new predator, they are made extinct. The same goes for massive environmental changes that affect their food supply. Life needed a way to harness energy to keep its cells humming along. It needed the power provided by its food and environment to satisfy the nearly all-consuming need to reproduce. Life had to have it. Mutation and other changes happen to more complex creatures over long periods of time, although in some short-lived species, such as fruit flies, several generations could be experimented on in the span of a month. Technically, any generation could spawn a helpful mutation. Its brood would be the ones to bring about the next generation, and so on. But M2 didn't take long to adapt. Not long at all. It had been somewhere in the M2 trench, hiding beneath the ocean floor and no doubt snacking on the occasional tidbit of food. It shouldn't have been a surprise that it resembled a mixture of oceanic life when it appeared on the rig. However, it had also made the most of its environment. Inside Leaguer's interior, it had used the walls, the corridors, anything it could to stalk its prey. Once on the deck, however, it had alternated between the moving pool of living liquid and slashing the air with manufactured talons. Another shiver racked her, and it took her a moment to get it under control. Face it, or you'll always be hiding from it. Yes, very true. Also a bit easier said than done. Evolve, she said to herself. Evolve or die. That brought up another thought. Pressure. The oil they brought up had been at a depth of nearly 10 kilometers. That meant as the substance rose through the drill string, pressure had fallen away, but the creature that came up in the barrel hadn't seemed to have suffered from the enormous pressure differential. Maybe we're thinking about this wrong, she thought. We don't know what M2 actually looked like when it was below the ocean floor. There's no way of knowing that. Did it change to liquid when we brought it up? Or is that its natural, most basic form? A good question. She stifled a yawn. Maybe she could sleep now. She rolled over and slid an arm beneath Catfish's. In his sleep, he wrapped his other arm around her. Smiling, Shauna finally slept.